Hello. So how are you doing, people? People Burlingame, people south of the San Francisco Bay Area, people of the world, really. How are you today? So I've decided to put an end to my news posting because here I go posting news articles trying to inform you people what's happening in our country these days, and let's just say I sense a lack of engagement. I post some personal things, some world things, some international news, some local news, and some national news. And I just get a sense that what we got here is a little bit of a failure to comprehend, as the word goes. So what I'm going to do, moving forward, is rather than posting stuff from movies and films and news articles with my thoughts on the matters of the day, we're going to start a new series. This is going to be called Mr. Avila's Classroom. As some of you may or may not know, I'm actually a credentialed teacher in social science here in California. Credentials expired, but we can't all have the professional success we'd love to have. But there's no reason why I can't teach you the truth of this country. And the world, though, while we're at it. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about a recent news article I saw in the news. A new international agreement has been signed between the United States of America and El Salvador, where President Nayib Bukele, I hope I'm saying that right, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have come to an agreement where not only is the president of El Salvador going to take back his own citizens and others who may be here without proper documentation and have committed crimes, but he's also going to take in U.S. citizens. You heard me right. U.S. citizens convicted of crimes to do their time in El Salvador. This is not really constitutional, so there's not too much precedent in American history for this, but there is a precedent in world history, which is why I brought you this book, The Fatal Shore. It's about Australia, where the British Empire shipped its convicts, its citizens who had committed crimes, in their case subjects, because Britain is a monarchy, not a republic like us, and they shipped their subjects to lands beyond the seas. In the case of this, Australia, which at the time was an unsettled continent. Just as I'm sure that El Salvador is a land strange and unknown to many of the U.S. citizens who shall be going there shortly after committing a crime. And before you say, but me, Mr. Avila, I would never commit a crime. Well, anyone could make a mistake. Anyone could be falsely accused. And it ain't too hard in our criminal justice system today to be convicted when you're innocent. Happens all the time. Check the Innocence Project. Check the DNA evidence that comes up all the time. People do indeed, in documented cases, get set free, haven't been convicted. You'd hate for them not to be set free in El Salvador because you shipped them overseas. And of course, we have many people doing time, for many different property crimes, which in and of themselves aren't particularly violent. Popular misconception is that all criminals, particularly all Latino criminals, are sex offenders and drug dealers. People, this is just not true. It's a misconception. Most crimes are property related in nature, and anyone could make a mistake. But, having stopped on the current relevance, let us look at the history to see where are we going as a country if we imitate Imperial Britain and Australia's example. So in 1787, the first fleet of convicts landed in Australia and started the first penal colony. But there was actually a long debate in Great Britain at the time leading up to this moment, which began around the issue of mass incarceration. Amazing how in the 18th century so much to teach us here today. If we take a look, and I've read the book, so I'm just going to summarize. I was going back to reread it for you, but in the interest of time, I'll just summarize. We take a look, and we understand that in that era, there were not too many prisoners, simply because there wasn't enough capacity to hold them. What there were some small, dark, crowded jails and gallows. There was a lot of execution in the day. Even property crimes of a non-violent nature were punished by hanging. Another thing that's in the news these days. And so, in 18th century Britain,
What?
One second, people. In 18th century Britain, most crimes were punished by the death penalty, which meant that there weren't too many prisons, so most people went to the gallows high. However, what prisons there were overcrowded, small, and dank. And this is before the era of before the penitentiary was born. It was when they were just dungeons. In order to get rid of its excess prisoners and hang them all, which created a popular outcry, the British Crown came up with a solution. It would ship its excess prisoners to the colonies, where they would work for free as indentured servants until the term of their years was up. This first happened in America, but after 1776, Great Britain lost America as its favorite dumping ground. So it moved to Australia. And while I could go into a long digression about Australian history here, I'm not going to. Because the bottom line here isn't that we would be Australia in this case. No, that'd be El Salvador. We would be 18th century Britain. And we just have to ask ourselves some questions about the kind of criminal justice system we want to have. We're shipping people overseas, exiling them from the country in order to punish them for their crimes. Also, geopolitically, it would turn El Salvador into a settler colony, because I'm going to presume that eventually these people finished their sentences. And they had to go somewhere, and it wasn't back here, right? In which case, we're using this as a tool of U.S. imperialism to colonize Central America. Many America First types may be all right with this. If so, you should understand that there's going to come a day when there's going to be a move for independence in Central America. Whether from Central Americans themselves, who don't maybe want to be our dumping ground, just as we do not wish to be theirs. Or perhaps from our fellow citizens, who, having finished their sentences, don't really want to return to the country, aren't quite at home in El Salvador, but don't really feel like being part of a country that's sent them into prison exile in a distant land. It really is a fascinating topic and an interesting historical comparison to make. I would go on further. Actually, let me go on further. There are three main points, I think, here. The first is that penal transportation doesn't work. Why it was gotten rid of? It simply did not work. It served its purpose to fill up Australia and colonize it, but it did not work as an effective deterrent to crime. In fact, it worked in the opposite way. People went, hey, shit, I can get a free trip to Australia. Why shouldn't I? Rather than saying, oh my god, Australia, the horrors. Two, in addition to not working, it created a geopolitical problem for Britain to manage on the other side of the world. And three, to the extent it worked too well, Australia did become a civilized country, it was settled, and free settlers showed up who no longer wished to be used as jailers in an open-air prison. What's the bottom line here? Bottom line is that colonizing El Salvador via penal labor, while it may extend a U.S. influence in the region, will ultimately create a geopolitical crisis. When those free convicts, because eventually their terms aren't going to come up and they're going to have to live somewhere, even if it isn't here, whatever free American settlers show up, and of course the locals, decide that they really don't want to be continued to be used as the United States dumping ground. This might result in a peaceful dominion as it did in Australia, or it might not. One thing to remember is that the fate of the Aboriginal inhabitants of Australia is a dark chapter in world history. They were largely slaughtered by the convict settlers. I don't think that El Salvadoranians wish to share that fate. So, we have embarked on a new imperial project in Central America. We'll see how it goes. Whatever else, it's going to be interesting. And I'm using the Australian comparison because it says something about our society here at home. We're moving back to a time before the American Revolution, when exile as the punishment for crimes was common, and the alternative was death, not imprisonment. That's the kind of society you want to live in, and perhaps you've forgotten the American Revolution. And that's it for today's installment of Mr. Avila's Classroom. I'll be back later to hit you up with more. In the meantime, check the comments. I'm going to include a link to the article, as well as a GoFundMe. You like the insight, you like the history, you like the books, the actual historical documentation using secondary sources to back up what I have to say, leave me a donation or a comment. By the way, the book I've been holding up throughout this lecture is The Fatal Shore by Robert Hughes. It's a history of Australia at its founding. It goes from 1787 into the 1850s. History of penal transportation in Australia by the British Empire, which might give us some clues as where penal transportation by the American Empire, El Salvador, is going. Thank you for your time. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss more about what this means for our society. Are we turning into a monarchy? It's a good question, and if we are, all sorts of implications abound. Thank you for your time.